Hello YouTube, Joseph John again. I just have this topic, mandatory work activity, I need to look at a second time, and I think I'm going to do another video looking at some people's comments on how they feel about the mandatory work activity. But in this video I want to look at the difference between the mandatory work activity program, the work program, and work experience, because I think the job centre has like different schemes and there's some confusion that's going on between the different schemes. What's voluntary, what's not voluntary, and whether they're useful to you or not. There's a confusion, especially since the mandatory work activity is out there now, and I think people are confusing that with work program, and they're sort of similar, as we're going to find out, but they're not exactly the same. So I'm going to look at the job centre work experience. What is that? I think it's that is supposed to be a voluntary scheme, I think, and in my opinion it can be useful. It's, I think, directed at young people, but it can, it should be for anybody really, who needs to get work experience. But for young people, it's for them to get their initial work experience and then hopefully get their foot into the door, similar to what they do in school. When they're in school, they get like a week or so of work experience, and then supposedly they can get a job, but in fact that work experience they get in school is not really enough. It can still be useful, but it's not really enough to get a job. So the job centre can send you on something a bit more substantial, like 3 months, and then you can put that on your CV. When you go for interviews, people can see that you've done some relevant work experience, and you're more likely to get a job. And I think that scheme is useful. But you have these other schemes, like what used to be the work program, that came across as being voluntary but also mandatory. Sounds a bit strange, but they would tell you in the job centre that it's a voluntary thing that they want you to go on. It's going to benefit you in terms of giving you the relevant work experience in line with your career interests and so on and so forth. So they would have a provider who would try to find you some work placement. When you get to the work placement, then they will tell you it's mandatory. So they start acting in a similar way to how they do on the work activity. You feel like as if you're in a prison. You must do a certain number of hours. You can't leave. You only can take 1 hour lunch break, so on and so forth, even though you're not having a job. However, I think the government was initially getting out of any kind of litigation problems with the initial work program. That was because it was paid at a higher rate, compared to the normal job seekers. So you were getting a higher rate job seekers, and I think that quashed a lot of discrepancy or arguments that could arise. But it was still forced labour. I think then they brought it down to a situation where you just get the same money, the same job seekers allowance. It wasn't a higher rate, and then a provider would send you somewhere, like you saw the situation with Poundland, and that got into a legal wrangle. So after a High Court ruling, the courts said it's forced labour, it's illegal, and so the mandatory work program was now pulled out. It's basically similar, same thing, but it's just you have to do it. It's basically a sort of payback. What they say is like a payback, similar to work program. They try to say it's not forced labour, but it is forced labour, and it's a type of punishment or imprisonment for not being able to find a job soon enough. I think a guideline would be like 9 months onwards. If you don't find a job, then they can just put you onto one of these schemes. So you could go on there earlier. The only problem I think with the mandatory work activity is, how about, you know, some people who have worked for years, okay, and then become unemployed, and then after 9 months you're going to tell them, you know, you need to do some payback. That doesn't sound right to me. You know, what happened to the years and years of work that you've done previously? How about pay back that in some, you know, some sit down time? You know, if you've been working for 20 odd years and then you become unemployed, and then suddenly after 9 months you need to do payback. Well, I think you need to do 24 years sit down. In theory, I mean, you know, people could look at it like that. So I think there could be some unfairness to do with it. The other thing is the question of national insurance credits. You know, my understanding is you need like 33 years of continuous national insurance credits for you to qualify for the state pension. And then if you've achieved that, but you know, you still want to work, should the job centre be sending you on mandatory activities like, you know, forcing you into work, when in fact, you know, you've got a full national insurance account, you know, for your national insurance credits? So, you know, why your priority to get back into work? It should be people who have never worked. They should be a priority for going on to the mandatory work activity. You know, I think the mandatory work activity could be seen, because there was a High Court ruling for the work program, so they just roll out the mandatory work activity and say, well, everybody has to do it. Whoever becomes unemployed after a certain time, you can just go on it. You have to go on it. And instead of using multi-billion-pound organisations, they're just using, like, you know, what I've seen is some like smaller organisations are being used, because some of the bigger organisations have dropped out. The other thing about the mandatory work activity is supposed to be for people who I think the government deems to have lost their way, or, you know, they need some sort of stimulus to get them into the mood of working again, so on and so forth. So they put them in there. But I think if you are showing, you know, that you're doing something towards getting a job, like you're going on courses, you're getting work experience, so on and so forth, then you shouldn't be still sent onto the mandatory thing, you know, work activity, to waste your time. And I think one of the drawbacks with the mandatory work activity is that if you have people coming into the interview, one person had a job and just left it, wants to get a change, another person is still in work, and one person has come off the mandatory work activity, who would you employ? I think as an employer, why would you take someone who was forced into work? How do you know their interest is real? How can you trust it? Because they just came from a mandatory work activity, which has been forced upon them. How do you know if they're not, this job that they applied for, they weren't forced to apply for it? Would you take them? You know, so is it useful to have people into forced labour? I think it has to change. You should be going for a job off your own back. You want to work, so you've got to work. And if people don't want to work, then, you know, that should be their choice, I think. The other way of tackling this problem, it could be maybe the government needs to look at the percentage national insurance contribution that people make, maybe increasing that to help to pay for some of the unemployment bill. You know, what's wrong with doing that? Anyway, feedback the video, let me know what you think. Till next time, I'm out. Subscribe.